how Joule fits into SAP's AI strategy, what Joule can do, how it's able to do those things, and then how you can deploy Joule in your landscape. Uh, the last maybe 30 minutes of the session, I will go through BTP itself. Earlier, I used to go through the slides for BTP, talk about why BTP exists and so on. But I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with BTP. So I'd much rather do a demo, in which case that's what I will be doing today, where I'll be showing you at the BTP global account what exactly it is that would be of use to you when you're activating Joule. So we'll be talking about the Joule booster, which I'm sure you might have heard of. We'll be talking about Joule formations. We'll be talking about Joule entitlements. And as I'm going through that, I'll be showing it to you on a demo global account. So you're familiar with the individual sections that would be of interest to you at the BTP level when you go and activate Joule yourself. On day two, which is tomorrow, like I said, we're going to be talking about dependencies as to how Joule can actually function. And these are mandatory dependencies in most cases, especially CIS, Cloud Identity Services. For the dependencies, I will be following a flow of, I will be talking about foundational concepts. I almost call it a crash course in Cloud Identity Services and Build Workzone that you'll be getting tomorrow. But then we'd be focusing on why specifically they're important for Joule, because fundamentally this discussion is going to come back to Joule and why these dependencies are important and what will happen if these dependencies are not fulfilled. So I hope the agenda makes sense. Are there any questions on anything I've said so far about the agenda? I'll take silence as a no, and I'll keep firing away. Again, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourselves and ask me a question. But I suppose as a clarification as well, since Sapphire, at Sapphire we announced uh, a lot of new AI features, so Joule Studio 2.0 and agentic AI and so on. That's going to be available through something we call SAP Managed Joule. More information about that you would be getting, I suppose, end of this month. For this session, we're going to be focusing on customer managed Joule, which is what has been generally available up until now since I believe Q4 2024. So Joule, as you know it, we'll be talking about customer managed Joule. But in case some of you are familiar with SAP managed Joule, Joule Studio 2.0, and so on, that is something we won't be covering today, just to clarify. With that being said, let's get straight into it. Joule, SAP Joule, as it's formally called, topic of the hour. How does SAP Joule really fit into the business AI portfolio? Joule is the most prominent, and the key takeaway from this slide is Joule is the most prominent example of business AI at SAP, but it's not the only offering. But Joule is the most famous. It's the most visible, and it's the what end users can see when you set it up. And it's a co-pilot. It's a conversational LLM. I would also call it an large action model or LAM because it can perform actions for you on your behalf on different systems that you connect to it. But outside of Joule, there's also embedded AI capabilities that come with the cloud LOB solutions. So if some of you have success factors or some of you have Concur, there will be some functionalities and features in those solutions that have generative AI embedded into them already. An example that I use is goal creation in success factors. I have a screenshot of how that works a few slides ahead. But the idea is that, at the end of every quarter, at the end of Q4 or at the start of Q1 each year, if your organization uses success factors, your direct manager will be asked by HR to make you write up a list of your development goals for the upcoming year. And as part of these development goals, essentially, you'd have to come up with one, two, or three goals that you hope to achieve this year. And for each goal, you'd have to give a description. You'd have to give a reason as to why you want to achieve it, why you're considering this a goal, and also provide a list of KPIs, key performance indicators, to measure you on, saying, once I say I've achieved this goal, these KPIs are what can be used by you, the manager, to confirm that I've achieved these goals. And it's a bit of an arduous process because it takes up a decent bit of time to come up with those goals, come up with KPIs, deadlines, descriptions, and also justification for why you set those goals for yourself. And it used to be an input form that you fill in on success factors with all this information. and used to be quite time consuming, and which is why one of the first releases of embedded AI in SuccessFactors was automating that process. I have a screenshot that I'll show you. I'll do a callback to this information when I get to that slide. But now, with SuccessFactors, if you're on the latest release of SuccessFactors, which you will be, as it's a cloud solution, there will be when you go to the goal creation screen, there will be a generative AI option now where you're simply asked for input in the form of a sentence or a paragraph. And this could be something as simple as the goal that I want to achieve this year is becoming certified in SAP cybersecurity, specifically for ABAP systems, or specifically for cloud solutions like SuccessFactors. And there will be a generate icon beside that input box, and you press that out, and essentially from that single line input, saying I want to become a cybersecurity expert for ABAP systems, all that information that you previously had to fill out manually in the input boxes, so KPIs, deadlines, uh, the justifications, and essentially saying this is how you can, this is what I'm going to do to achieve this goal. All that information is pre-populated for you based on the goal that you just say you want to achieve. So the generative AI in SuccessFactors will just take that goal, becoming a cybersecurity expert for ABAP, come up with KPI saying achieved at least two certifications concerning this, performed POCs to show a more secure configuration of systems, and so on. All that information is generated for you. And that's embedded AI. There's no configuration required, there's no additional effort on your part. In cloud solutions, this comes with the latest release. And there's no extra thing you have to do. It's available for you. There's also customized AI. This is where a team in SAP called Customer Innovation Services comes in. You can essentially reach out to Customer Innovation Services. You can scope a specific out saying, none of SAP's standard AI offerings suit us. We have an idea, or we want to develop this particular solution that is for us or for our industry. How can SAP help? That conversation happens with Customer Innovation Services. You sign a contract, scope out the project, and then customer innovation services will work with you to deploy that for you on your behalf. So it's kind of like a co-innovation, if you're familiar with that term. That is also an offer SAP offers. Finally, I suppose if what SAP offers out of the box with Joule and embedded AI, and also the assistance SAP offers through customer innovation services, both aren't suiting your specific requirements, or maybe you're subject to compliance reasons saying you need to develop and use your own model. That's where the AI Foundation comes in. And AI Foundation is basically SAP saying, you know, this is the infrastructure, these are the tools you need, these are the runtime to train your own models. So bring your own data, choose these baseline models, bring your own, train those models on your data and deploy on your BTP instances. And that isn't accessible by anybody else outside your organization, of course, because you're deploying them on your instance of BTP. Or I suppose instance of BTP is not proper phrasing. You're deploying them within your own sub accounts within your global account. So those models are trained. They're trained on infrastructure that SAP provides through AWS, GCP, and the other hyperscalers. It's trained, and all this lives SAP, and you're the only one who can access it. So this is SAP saying, we're giving you the tools to develop and train your own models. And of course, the partnerships with data providers. Databricks would be the most popular one or the most recent one, I believe, through Business Data Cloud. And I like categorizing things, as you'll become familiar with over the next, today and tomorrow. And I really classify the business AI portfolio into two patterns. Pattern two is build it. So if you're not happy, if SAP standard offerings are not suitable for you, create your own or reach out to customer innovation services to help out with your use case. Pattern one is, see is what you get. They work out of the box. It's SAP offerings, standard offerings, although with Joule, there is some configuration required to integrate it within your landscape. That being said, let's get straight into Joule. I've got a couple of screenshots over here. All these screenshots are of what we the Joule web client. It's essentially the UI that end users see when they open up Joule. And regardless of what solution they open up Joule, they're going to get this same user experience. They're going to see this web client pop up within the solution. So if I'm logged into SuccessFactors and I open up within SuccessFactors, I'm going to see the same web client. If I'm logging into my Fiori Launchpad of my S4 system, I'm also going to be seeing the Joule web client. So this is really the entryway into an end user actually using Joule. And the very final step of activating Joule for a LOB solution is essentially making this web client visible for end users. I'll be talking a bit about this tomorrow when we talk about CIS and authorizations, but and this is a question we usually get towards the end of the EGI, but I'm happy to, both pose the question and answer it myself. Uh, does activating Joule or integrating Joule for an LOB solution mean that every user in your organization will be able to use Joule? That isn't the case for most solutions. So success factors in S4, for example, you need to assign users a specific permission on success factors and on S4 for them to actually be able to see the Joule web client actually pop up. So you could activate Joule for your system, for your S4 system, but unless you assign that permission to end users, they won't actually be able to see this web client or open up this web client. And I've seen it more often than you'd think, where organizations come to us and say, well, we've activated Joule, but there's no way for end users to actually see it. So did we go wrong somewhere? And it's really a step, which is assigning that permission to users, up until which they won't be able to see this web client or open up this web client. I've spoken a lot about Joule, but I'd like to show Joule in action. And I've got this video. The video has no audio, so bear with me. I'm going to provide a voiceover and provide context into what's happening. I'll be pausing the video at specific points and explaining different concepts about that we will be talking about today. And I'll be making callbacks to this video. So essentially in the future, maybe in like another 20 minutes, when we're talking about Joule's capabilities, I'll actually mention those capabilities here just when they are used as an example. And I'll make callbacks saying, okay, this is why this capability is classified specifically as this. Okay, let's go into the video. And for instance, what we're looking at is most likely a business site, Wexer. Uh, and you can see over here on the top right, there is a Joule icon over there. That Joule icon, by clicking on it, is what opens up the Joule web client that we saw on the previous slide. So for end users, that is the point of entry. So we're going to be looking at Walt interacting with Joule. And with that being said, let's play the video. So you can see over there, Walter is clicking the diamond icon and the Joule web client pops. This video is slightly old. I believe it's from Q4 2025. Since then, there has been updates to the web client. It looks a lot better. It performs quicker. But you can see over here, Joule essentially knows that Walter is the person that it's talking to. And you might ask, well, how does Joule this specific information? Well, it seems very simple, just knowing who it's talking to. That's taken from the single sign-on token. So Joule knows the currently logged in user who's managing the session is usually an attribute and just displays that over here. So this name changes based on the currently logged in user. So Walter starts talking to Joule and he says he wants to book a flight to Sapphire. Joule's going to think a bit and Joule's able to respond with information saying, you know, Sapphire is happening in Orlando in Barcelona. And again, this video is from 2024, I believe, or 2025, prior to Sapphire happening, which is why these dates are 2024. And specifically, what has happened right now is Joule's informational capability coming into play. Informational capability of Joule is the fundamental capability of Joule. So when you integrate Joule for a LOB solution, this could be S4, this could be success factors, this could be Concur. Um, Even if you missed some steps in the configuration, right? The informational capability is guaranteed to work because there's no, I suppose, interaction with SAP systems that Joule's performing there. Simply the LLM. It's simply Joule's ability to take in a string or a sequence or a paragraph as input and be able to respond it appropriately. And all that's using is just the base LLM's capabilities. There's no permissions being used, there's no information being retrieved from systems. It's simply if the LLM is trained on public information, of course, Sapphire dates are public information, so the informational capability will always work. You ask Joule without any problem, if you missed a lot of steps in configuration, but you're able to still get the web client, you're able to talk to Joule, the informational capability will always. But in case you miss some steps and you tell Joule, can you book a leave request for me on SuccessFactors? Joule will fall back to its informational capability and say, well, due to system limitations, I'm not able to do this for you. However, this is how you create a leave request on SuccessFactors. And that's public information. That's Joule simply saying, I don't have the either there's some configuration issue or there's a permissions issue. I can't do this. So the informational capability is always the fallback for Joule. And what you're seeing here is the informational capability, where Joule is simply saying, well, Sapphire is on these dates and these locations. Which one do you want to go to? Walter is going to go and pick Barcelona. Joule's going to start thinking here. And this is where context comes into play, where fundamentally Walter wants to book a flight. So Joule realizes just by answering saying this is when Sapphire is happening in these locations on these dates, the conversation isn't done. It remembers that fundamentally Walter wants to book a flight. So over here, when Walter says Barcelona, which is June the 11th, the 13th of June, Jewel recommends flying out the day before, so the 10th of June, and coming back the day after, which is the 14th of June. And it's also, can we confirm Waldorf, which most likely is where Walter is based out of, as the location for departing. And you're going to see Walter isn't going to be the most easiest person to deal with. So he brings up more demands. Walter wants to take 2 days of vacation before going back from Sapphire. And this is important over here, where Walter asks Jewel, do I still have enough days, vacation days left? I mentioned the informational capability as essentially Jewel's, uh, it's the LLM's ability to respond based on publicly available information it's been trained on. But the number of vacation days War has left isn't publicly available. It's specific to Walter, specific to Walter's user, most likely stored on successful. So I suppose you can infer that whatever is going to happen next is not going to be the informational capability. It's going to be some other capability of Joule. And what's going to happen now, as you can see, Joule's going to respond saying, yes, you have 25 days of vacation. So Joule somehow has retrieved information specific to Walter here. Not publicly available information, but information specific to Walter saying, Walter, you have 25 days of vacation left. And then it also asks, do you want to create a leave request? So this, and there has been, I suppose, discussions earlier where you could argue this is still an informational capability where Joule is simply responding to a question. But the distinction is that Joule isn't responding to a question with publicly available information. It's retrieving user-specific information from a system. And behind the scenes, what has happened is Joule has made an API call to SuccessFactors with Walter's credentials to retrieve information specific to Walter, namely his vacation days. And this is what we call a transactional capability. The transactional capability is when Joule either performs an action on a user's behalf or retrieves specific information from a system using the user's permissions. And you're going to see next another example of the transactional capability action where Joule has asked Walter, do you want to create a leave request? And of course, Walter is going to say yes, because he doesn't want to move to SuccessFactors and do it himself. And you're going to see over here a confirmation saying the leave request was created. We can infer a couple of things, and let's maybe park the discussion. And what do we know so far? We know that Walter is not in SuccessFactors right now, but through using Joule, Walter is able to retrieve information from success factors and perform actions on that success factors instance, namely creating a leave request. So this is what we call unified Joule, but the unified Joule is going to be a detailed discussion towards the end of today's session as to what that means, what it looks. But fundamentally, we know that this Joule instance is connected to both this business side and it's connected to success factors. How do we know it's connected to success factors? Because it's able to retrieve information from that success factors instance and then also go and leave request for Walter on that success factors instance. So the main benefit, as you can see over here, is Walter did not have to go to success factors himself to check his vacation days and to create a leave request. Joule did it for him. And again, this is also an example of a transactional capability because Joule performed an action on Walter's behalf on a SAP system. So it's not informational. It's not simply retrieving information. It's going and performing an action. And I suppose this the transactional capability amongst everything, or anything that Joule can do. I'll be briefly mentioning Joule's skills in a future slide, but I'll do a callback to that here. The ability of Joule to go and create a leave request can be represented as a Joule skill. You can essentially think about a Joule skill as the smallest action or a singular action Joule can do. So creating a leave request is a process, right? So actually logging into success factors, looking at the number of vacation days user has left, looking at the dates that the user can actually take PTO or take vacation days for, booking the vacation days, sending them for approval. So the whole process of booking a leave or creating a leave request involves these little steps. Each of these little steps are presented by a Joule skill. So multiple Joule skills combine to go and perform this action. So the ability to view the vacation days field itself, for example, is a Joule skill. The ability to modify a specific field on success factors for a user, maybe change their birthday, that is a Joule skill. The ability to go and modify the birthday field. The ability to go and view the marital status field, which I'll bring up in an example in the future, is also a skill. So it's the smallest action or is the smallest unit of action that Joule can do on a system. Is that's represented by a Joule skill. If you're familiar with charts, you can think of a process being represented as a flowchart, and that flowchart, each step is a Joule skill, and when combined together, they create an actual, they perform an action. Okay, back to the video because there was a lot of information, but I'll pause for questions here. Are there any questions on the informational capability of Joule, transactional capability of Joule, the Joule web client, Joule being integrated with different systems? I'll take silence as a no and go on, but if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat. So we've seen two capabilities of Joule so far. We've seen the informational capability and we've seen the transactional capability. Informational is Joule responding based on publicly available information. Transactional is Joule retrieving users information or going and performing an action for a user on a system. That's a very good question. Is Joule and Joule for Consultant the same? No. I have a slide on that coming up. The Joule that we're talking about right now specifically is Joule for business. It's the Joule we integrate with different LOB solutions. And I suppose to distinguish after the Sapphire announcements, it's specifically customer managed Joule for business. For consultants is another flavor of Joule. I'll be talking specifically about what it is in a few slides ahead, but they're not the same. The main distinguishing factor is Joule for Consultants is not going to have the transactional capability. It's essentially going to be the informational capability of Joule for, but it's trained on a lot more public-facing SAP documentation and internal SAP documentation. They're not the same, but they're both, and I think there's a concentrated effort right now to refer to Joule for Consultants specifically as J4C to distinguish it from Joule. Generally, when we talk about Joule, we're talking about Joule for business. I hope that answers your question. But I do have a slide, few slides ahead. We distinguish between Joule for business, Joule for consultants, and Joule for developers, which is also another flavor of Joule. Uh, at the technical level as well, maybe I can show you in the BTP demo. They're both Joule and Joule for consultants are powered. Like if you can call it that way, it's still powered by the Joule instance, same Joule instance behind the scenes, but the dependencies change. Specifically, Joule for Consultants has a dependency called the SE consulting capability that is provisioned for you when you get Joule for Consultants. Regular Joule will not have the SAP consulting capability as part of it. Sarav, this wouldn't be industry specific Joule agent. No. This is just display of Joule and its capabilities, its base capabilities, specifically Joule for business. There's no agentic action happening here. This is just Joule on its own. Thank you for those questions. So going back to the video, you can see Walter, again, isn't very easy to deal with. He keeps adding instructions. So fundamentally, and Joule remembers that, yes, I've created a leave request, but initial intent was to book a flight to Sapphire. So Joule again asks him, do you want to continue booking that flight? And Walter says, yes, but I don't want the departure location Waldorf, like you suggested. I want it to be Berlin. And now Joule's going to do a bit of thinking. And what it's doing in the background is actually retrieving flight details from Berlin to Barcelona. And again, just pausing it over here, what you're seeing over here is Joule's navigational capability. And you might again ask, well, what's the difference between navigational and transactional? Because you just said transactional is Joule's ability to go and retrieve user specific information from a system or go and perform an action on a system. And you could argue that, well, these flights, yes, they're publicly available information, but these specific flights could also be internal information through Concur. But what makes this the navigational capability is the presence of this button on each option called select. And the navigational capability of Joule is basically Joule saying, this is the app or this is the web page that you need to go to perform action. So remember initially when I said, uh, if you don't have the permission, maybe to see sales orders, or if there's any configuration issue, Joule will say, I can't do this due to system limitations. This is how you do it. If that information is coming in as text, that's the fallback coming in, right? That's just the informational capability. You ask Joule, for example, where do I go and see sales orders on an S4 system? Joule should respond to you saying, this is the managed sales order app. This is the app that is used to go and view sales orders. And it'll actually link that Fiori app for you. And you'll have the name of the Fiori app over here, and you'll have an option button called open. In this case, you have select, but this is the navigational capability. And as you proceed, Walter, once again, more filtering. So it says only want flights after 3 p.m. and I only want direct flights, no connecting flights. And you're going to see Joule again go and filter these results and come back with flights to Barcelona that suit Walter's demands. And it does a bit of thinking, it does a bit of processing, and it's going to come now with an updated list of flights, which is essentially just a single one. Berlin to Barcelona for Sapphire, departing a day before Sapphire, coming back on the seven on sorry, this is just a single one-way flight. This is not the returning flight. This is just Berlin to Barcelona. You can see more information over there and select. So Walter has chosen this flight. Now Joule's going to come back with a list of return flights, Barcelona, back to Berlin. And this is going to be a few days after Sapphire ends because Walter said wants to book 2 days off. So instead of the coming back on the 14th, the departure is back on the 16th, back to Berlin. Walter's going to select this flight now. And what's going to happen now is he's going to get a link saying book now in Concur. And that's also the navigational capability coming into play, where Joule is saying, this is where you go and book your flights. Joule is not going to book the flights for him because It's quite, I suppose an expensive transaction. You don't want Joule automating that without a human in the loop. So it's a navigational capability, Joule's ability to book flights. So again, what can we infer from this video? We know Joule is connected to success factors. We know Joule is connected to Concur. We know that, and this is going to be important, we know that Walter has permissions to book a leave request for himself and also to book flights on Concur. And how do we know this? How do we know Walter has these permissions? And this was a key question during Joule's designing phase, which was security. There is this concept of an escalation of privilege attack, which is if I'm a, let's say, a business analyst at an organization and I have access to the ERP, so S4, and let's say I have specific permissions to do my job and just my job. Whatever permissions I need to do carry out my job on a day-to-day basis, I've been given on the S4 system. And the understanding is that, if I don't have the need to run a particular transaction or to run a particular report or to access a specific Fiori app, in order to do my job, then I shouldn't be allowed those permissions. When Joule was designed, and this idea of Joule performing actions on a user's behalf came into the picture, that was the main question that had to be addressed. What's stopping somebody from using Joule to perform actions on a system that they can't do themselves? So if I don't have the permission to create a new purchase order on an S4 system myself, what if the user could just talk to Joule and say, Joule, can you create a purchase order for this organization for this amount of money on this system? And to address that initial problem that we identified, a key design decision was made for Joule, which is Joule will not perform an action on a system if the user that is talking to it, if the user cannot do the action themselves. So if I'm talking to Joule and I tell Joule, can you create a leave request for me on SuccessFactors? If I don't have the permission on SuccessFactors to create a leave request, Joule will refuse to do it and say, I can't do this action. This is how you can do it yourself. So that's Joule falling back on the informational capability. Similarly, if I don't have the permission to create a purchase order on S4 and I tell Joule, create a purchase order on this S4 system with these details, Joule will say, I can't do this, but this is how you can do it yourself. It's falling back. So the transactional capability is failing, not because of a configuration issue, but because my user does not have the permission to perform that action on the S4 system. And this was a conscious decision. We didn't want to use a technical user to facilitate Joule's, you know, facilitate Joule's performing of actions on a system, because then it raises a question of what permissions and what authorizations should be providing that technical user. If people across the organization are using this instance and to interact with S4, we can't be giving that technical user an exhaustive list of permissions, right? We can't be giving it permission to do everything. We don't want to be giving it SAP all. So that decision to use the currently logged in user's permissions to facilitate any requests they have of Joule was taken. And I suppose as a natural follow on, you might ask, well, how does Joule know what my permissions are on S4? Joule know what my permissions are on SuccessFactors? So during the configuration of Joule for Business, and I said there's going to be dependencies, there's going to be some configuration out. Your user's permissions on, let's say, S4 and SuccessFactors need to be replicated to WorkZone. And I'll talk about that today. But that's a key step because WorkZone essentially turns into a repository of a user's permissions on different systems. And Joule can request WorkZone saying, well, I've been asked to take this action on S4. Does this user have the permissions to do this? So essentially, WorkZone becomes a one-stop shop for Joule to know what authorizations you have on different systems. There was a lot of information, guys. Any questions on anything I've said so far? We've spoken about the informational capability, we've spoken about the transactional capability, the navigational capability. We've spoken about this whole design choice of Joule using a user's own permissions to perform actions. and Joule not being able to do actions that the user cannot do themselves. And you've spoken about the ability of Joule to be connected to multiple different systems. There's also another video on S4HANA Cloud, but I'll let you guys watch it on your own time. And everything I spoke about just on the capabilities, I've essentially summarized over here. So we have the informational capability, the navigational capability, transactional capability, and finally the analytical capability, which is the one thing I didn't get a chance to show you in that video. But before we go into this, are there any questions? Take silence as a no. I'll keep going ahead. So the different capabilities of Joule, we've classified them based on what Joule does. So the informational capability, I've got examples over here, is you simply asking Joule a pretty straightforward question. And Joule simply responds to it because it knows the answer without having to query a different system, for example. It knows it the answer inherently, either because it's been trained on that information or because you provided that information through it, a document. And this is document grounding essentially. So, and again, the idea of trust is always a problem with LLMs. What's stopping them from hallucinating? And when you ask Joule a question and it uses the informational capability to respond, it always references a ground truth documentation saying this got this information from. This could be a document that you uploaded. This could be help.sap documentation, an SAP KBA, an SAP note, and so on. But it gives you references saying this is where I got this information from. And the key ability is fundamentally it's answering a question. That's the informational pattern. It is the most basic pattern. If any of these capabilities don't work, or either it could be a configuration issue, or it could be, for example, when I'm saying show me details to this purchase order, but I don't have the permissions to actually view purchase orders, Joule will not execute the transactional capability. It'll fall back to the information capability saying, I can't do this due to system limitations, but this is how you can do it yourself. Shivapriya, there's no demo system that I'm aware of currently, but I'll reach out internally to see if there's any public demo. I know for solutions like Cloud ALM, we have public demos. I'm not aware of a demo for Joule that's customer facing just yet. But if I can find one, I'll shoot an email over to you.
Sure, thank
Apologies
you.
for that.
And all, and also I have another question. So
Yeah,
let's say once we deploy the Joule to the business,
yeah.
and and if they want to retrain, I mean, keep on training the system, like so for example, in the demo you showed that the document policy, something, the word document that Joule refers to, and the next year, there is some changes to the policies, and they want to update the new document, and so that, and also want to make sure that Joule has that latest policy guidelines that the corporation is going to have follow. So how do they keep training? Is it like they can do it by themselves, or they need to get back to SAP to have the Joule keep trained?
Okay, very good. It wouldn't really be a training thing that you'd have to do, right? So Joule on its own, I suppose with every new release of Joule, there's no action that you need to perform. It's just Joule gets new capabilities. It becomes more capable of doing more actions. So release to release, that's really what is getting updated. Joule can do things now. But with this documentation, for example, this is you essentially uploading a document for Joule to refer to. So you can just
Oh,
upload
okay.
you can just upload the newer document. You don't need to train Joule on it. Joule is simply referring to that document when you ask a question from that document. So you can just upload the newer version. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to reach out to SAP for that.
Okay, so a follow-up question. So you said like where with the new versions of Joule, like so is it like an S4 upgrade, like each version of S4 upgrade that Joule is getting upgraded, or is it like pushed to the client directly?
So the LOB solution getting updated wouldn't have an impact on what I suppose. Okay, I'll answer it this way. Joule, and taking S4 as an example, because Joule supports S4 versions over 2021. But if you have S4 2022, let's say, you'll have Joule will be able to do less things than what it can do on S4 2025, if that makes sense. So there's a limitation on, based on your LOB solution versioning, Joule can only do some things, but your Joule instance is always going to be up to date because it's cloud based. The release schedule is every 2 weeks, I believe, is the update. But you don't have to worry about updating Joule. Joule's going to be consistently updated. It's only via LOB solution. So there's specific capabilities for Joule that it can do on S4 2025. The specific capabilities that Joule can do on 2023 and 2022, so on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So even if we go for a new version of S4, we need not worry about the Joule getting updated because it's by every two
Yeah,
weeks it
yeah.
gets
You don't
updated.
have to
Okay.
worry about
Okay.
Joule at all. No. Joule's going to be, when we say we do, you do integrate it, but in terms of versioning, you don't have to worry about it. You can proceed with your S4 upgrade.
Okay. Thank you.
But thank you very much for those questions. Um, so we spoke about the informational pattern. The navigational is also something that I showed you very quickly. It's Joule, for example, where can I see purchase orders? That's Joule simply responding saying, well, you can use these Fiori apps. You can just click the open. The version that we saw was select in the demo that Walter's doing for booking flights. Transactional. And I suppose this is a good example to explain the difference between transactional and informational, where again, show me details of this purchase order and you can see over here, this information is coming through. And you might ask, well, informational is responding to a question that's transactional. How are they different? And it really comes down to the source. Uh, this purchase order, this specific number is specific to your S4 system. So there's no way of Joule to know it without being connected to the S4 system itself. And there's no way of Joule being able to know it if you don't have the permission to view sales orders. So let's say, what would this look like if you don't have the permissions to view purchase orders? In which case, you can ask Joule to display purchase order and you can type in this number. Joule will make an API call to S4 to a specific OData endpoint to view this purchase order. And it's going to doing that using something called principal propagation. So it's using your credentials, your authorizations to do this. And if your user doesn't have the permissions on S4, the OData endpoint will say, well, this user who you're trying to use to access this data doesn't have the permissions, and it'll return a 403 unauthorized. And what you'll see over here is Joule responding saying, I couldn't do this due to system limitations. This is how you do it. And it'll fall back to the informational capability. And that's the main difference between informational and transactional. Transactional is when system specific data needs to be queried. And in this case, it is. An easier difference is when you ask Joule to create a purchase order, and then the difference becomes very clear. Where informational is you just getting answers, but in this case, transactional, you're actually requesting the state of its system to change. But when it comes to just retrieving data from both cases, the difference is this is publicly available information or information that you provided explicitly through a document, when transactional is information specific to your system that requires an API call. The analytical pattern is something that I haven't gone through in that video, but if you have a SAP Analytics Cloud tenant, you can integrate Joule with SAC and you can ask for it to generate visualizations, bar graphs, line graphs, and pie charts, and so on, for data that data, retrieve data from success factors in this case, generate a visualization for you, and Joule can do that. These are the four patterns right now. As Joule keeps getting developed, there might be more patterns coming along as well. And these are the four, everything that Joule can do is categorized into the one of these four capabilities. So if you're troubleshooting, one of the first questions you'll have to ask is really, is it just the informational pattern that is working? Is navigational and transactional not working? In which case you can troubleshoot your permissions, you can troubleshoot your connections to those systems and so on. Or if, for example, if transactional and if informational and navigational are working and transactional is the only one that isn't, then it's most likely it's a permissions issue. So you can double check that. But fundamentally, the informational capability will always work. Sorry if I just saw that question. Apologies. Is Joule running on BTP Cloud Foundry and calling different APIs from development on an SAP build? Um, it's not. I wouldn't say it's calling different APIs on SAP build. Maybe I don't have that level of visibility to answer that API question specifically, but it is deployed on Cloud Foundry. That is correct. The Joule is deployed on your sub account. It's running on a Cloud Foundry sub account that you choose. And the API calls itself specifically, that's done because you're exposing those API endpoints from your S4 system to your Cloud Connector, for example. For success factors, it just knows that the OData API exists. And for each, let's say, if I can talk about it this way, for each query you give it, Joule essentially analyzes to see what is the user's intent, what is it that they're asking, and then it maps to something we call the scenario catalog, which I'll go through, and essentially says, okay, I've been asked to see purchase orders. What needs to be done for me to see purchase orders? So it's kind of a list of instructions that Joule is provided. And using that, Joule knows which API endpoint to call, and then it makes the actual endpoint call. And based on the user's authorizations, it's either successful or it isn't. But I'll talk about that in a few slides ahead, specifically as to how those API calls actually work and how Joule knows which API to call. Raja, Joule agents versus Joule assistants. I don't have any specific information. That's going to be part of SAP managed Joule, not customer managed Joule. I don't have a concrete answer to that yet, and I don't want to give you a misleading answer for that. So I can maybe email you about it as to what I can answer, but that's out of the scope of this EGI specifically. Burn, how can you manage permissions for custom apps in private cloud? Um, I believe as long as you're exposing the permission that allows the user to see that custom app, it should be doable. However, I'm not sure if behind the scenes if Joule will be able to navigate to that custom app. Essentially, when you're setting up Joule for S4, you do something called content federation, where you're exposing standard rules that SAP offers. And through those standard rules, of course, there's Fiori apps that are assigned to those roles. So that's how Joule knows, okay, this user has been assigned, say, SAP BR manager or SAP BR BUPA specialist and so on. So it's able to see things like business partners, sales orders, and so on. Um, Custom apps, I think you'd be limited by Joule skills there, or if would Joule actually be able to call that custom map. But the permission management generally is completely on the S4 system itself. So all your any users that you have on S4, it's the permissions that you assign to them on S4 that matter. You don't need to go changing where you assign permissions. You manage your permissions completely on your line of business solutions. So for success factors, you manage them on success factors. For S4, you manage it on S4. On Ariba, you manage it on Ariba. The only thing that you have to do really for Joule is replicate that information to Excel. So the management exists on the private cloud system itself in your case. Okay. So I believe there was a question earlier on, is Joule for consultants the same as Joule for business? That's what this slide is really for. That initial idea that I was talking about with embedded AI, that's over here, where within Success Factors, and if you're on the latest Success Factors release, you should be seeing this. You can just type in a goal over here and you can just click generate and all those input fields, so KPIs, descriptions, justification for justification for this goal, deadlines, and so on, are all created for you. It's just from one or two line input that you do. uh, Previously the only option was create from scratch, where you got that input form, you have to fill in each input field, and it took a lot of time. But now, just type in what you want to do, type in generate, and it creates the goal for you. So it saves a lot of time. That's embedded AI. But specifically, Joule for business is what we've been talking about so far. There's also Joule for consultants and Joule for developers. Joule for business is the Joule that you integrate with different LOB solutions. It's what we saw in Walter's video. It's what can talk across systems and so on. Joule for consultants, the easiest way for me to describe it is you can think about it as the informational capability of Joule for business, except it has a lot more information that it's been trained on. It's not going to be capable of navigational capabilities. It's not going to be capable of transactional capabilities. It's only going to be able to do the informational capability. except it's trained on a lot more information, a lot more documentation, and it doesn't require you to integrate it with LOB solutions. Joule for Consultants is designed to be completely standalone. It's web-based, so you access it through a URL. You don't have to connect it to any of your systems, and essentially you can treat it like a, a project expert, I would say, or an SAP expert on different topics, because it has access to a lot of documentation. So it's quite useful for things like Rise migrations and so on, where you might have very specific questions that you're not sure of, and Joule for Consultants more often than not will have the answer to that. And what makes it quite useful is it's also going to be able to refer to documentation to actually tell you, well, this is the answer, but this is also where I got this answer. So that element of trust is also maintained. And I have a demo for Joule for Consultants, and this is an internal demo over here that I'd like to show very quickly just after I go through this. But the key takeaway from this slide is, look, when we say Joule, we're talking about Joule for business. Joule for consultants and Joule for developers, we'll specifically talk about them as J4C or J4D. Joule for developers is also an interesting case. Um, Joule for developers, I would say it comes in two varieties. One is Joule for developers for SAP Build, so build process automation and so on. There's Joule for developers for that, so generative AI on that side, and that's completely cloud-based. But there is also Joule for developers for the BTP ABAP environment. So on a sub account, if you have an ABAP sub account and you're performing ABAP development in that sub account, you can have Joule for developers for the ABAP environment, and that essentially comes with ABAP code complete and so on. So it essentially functions within your ABAP ADT, your ABAP development tools. And it's a coding assistant at that point. But I'd like to bring this in just as for reference. I see a question from Rajat. Will J4C do action like configuration? J4C will not do configuration for you, but what it will do is advise you. It's only going to be giving you information. It's not going to be performing actions. It'll only give you information. So over here, for example, over here, I can just, this is internal version of Joule for consultants that we have. And you can see over here, it's completely web-based. There's no integrations with systems. And all I can really do, I can ask questions to it, and it's going to be very good at replying. So it's the informational capability improved multiple times simply because it's been trained on a lot more documentation. And I would classify Joule for consultants as an expert for on the informational capability. Joule for business is more of a generalist. It can, it has the informational capability, but of course it also has the navigational and transactional. It's able to perform actions and so on. So you can see all of this is documented as information over here. All of these references exist and so on. And there were lots of updates made for Joule for Consultants that were announced at Sapphire, one of which was the Expert Workspace prompt library. So Joule for Consultants is cloud-based again. So you get this all of this is globally, generally available. So this, what I'm showing you right now is available in J4C as we speak. It's GA. And the ability of the expert workspace is you can create different personas. You can essentially tell Joule for consultants, you are you're a clean core expert in this case, and this is essentially a prompt that SAP has made saying this is a persona that Joule for consultants is going to adopt, and you can have Joule for consultants. Oh, I've already created that, so let me create a logistics expert over here. You can modify this if you'd like, but this is all instructions that SAP through prompt engineering have tried and retried. You can see they're giving it specific instructions saying refer to these SAP nodes, refer to this information as well, use this structure to structure your response, and so on. And I can just, this is predefined personas that SAP make available. Oh, I think I've already created this as well. Okay, so let's go over here. Yes, I've already created a logistics expert, needs attention. There might be an issue somewhere. Maybe I modified this and it doesn't like it. So you can see though, I've created a clean core expert over here, and I can go in here, I can click try in Joule, and it's going to adopt any instructions given here within this chat. And each person using J4C can create their own experts and so on. They don't have to be, you can use the SAP library or SAP experts that SAP has given as templates, but you can also create your own experts. For example, I made this as a joke saying this Joule acts as if it's Batman, and I'm going to ask it to explain what is SAP Voice, and this will respond to me acting as if Joule is Batman and I'm Robin, because that's the instruction that I've given it. Also, it's combining a bit of Eddie Murphy as well, so it's a bit complicated, this persona. So you can see over here, it's making Batman references. It's referring to Robin, Two-Face, who's a villain in Batman. So that's where the power of personas becomes important, because you can essentially create a persona that is you're comfortable talking to, I suppose. If you prefer answers in a specific format, or if you want to give Joule for Consultant specific context, you can create your own expert over here. You can provide an instruction saying, this, imagine this is what you're working on, this is a project you're helping out with, this is some information. When you reply, always reference these systems, always reference this architecture. You can upload documents. So if you have, let's say, a landscape diagram that you want Joule for Consultants to refer to, you're talking to it, you can upload those landscape diagrams up to a gigabyte in size and so on. Shivapriya, yes, you can. You can update the persona with custom instructions. That's the, suppose, kind of a joke persona that I showed you that pretends like it's Batman. You can create your own custom instructions. The J4C link, this is currently internal only, so that it wouldn't work outside of SAP. But you can set up your own J4C. It's probably the easiest to set up. There's no demo that I'm aware of just yet, but internally, this is a demo that we use. But this only works if you're within SAP. In which case, could you pop me a message on Teams and I can send a link over to you? Just shoot me a message on Teams and I will pop the link over to you in Teams. Okay. Uh, this also the prompt library. So in case you're not familiar with how to talk to Joule for Consultants, or you're looking for some templates to start a conversation on, let's see if you're looking at patch management and you want to come up with patch management. I'll pop my email into the chat and maybe you could shoot an email over to me as well about it. So in case you're looking for a starter conversation, let's say patch management, this is something that SAP has written and given. You can just click try in Joule, and Joule for Consultants will respond with a patch management strategy that you can use as a starter template to have that conversation within your organization. And all of this is Joule for Consultants specifically. It's quite easy to set up. There's a lot. It's arguably the easiest to set up. The real idea is that if you have a CIS tenant, a Cloud Identity Services tenant, the main thing you'd have to do is get the entitlements to use Joule for Consultants, run the Joule booster, and choose Joule for Consultants as what the Joule you want to deploy. And the result of that, I can show you this because I have a demo, I believe, running over here. The result of you running a Joule booster, and I'll show this demo to you again at the end of the session. I'm pretty sure we had SAP consulting capability here, unless someone's, yep, over here. So this is what a Joule for Consultants formation looks like. The consulting capability is not something that you have to set up. It's something that essentially is available for you if you have the entitlements to use Joule for Consultants. So the only integration that Joule for Consultants has is with a CIS tenant, a Cloud Identity Services tenant. And you can see it by going in here into the sub account. I hope I have access to this one. I can even show you how this Joule is actually living. So going into instances and subscriptions over here, you can see Joule for Consultants deployed here. And this is a URL that's going to take me into this application, and hopefully I have access. I might not, but I can quickly try. And whether I have access to Joule for Consultants or not is maintained by you. So if you're setting up Joule for Consultants for your organization, it is completely managed by you as to which users you give access to for Joule for Consultants. Give me a very quick second while I try to find my credentials for this specific tenant. And the in terms of integrations, again, Joule for Consultants, the only thing you're managing is just the user base. You choose a CIS tenant that you want to use. You add users to a group, and only users in that group will have access to your CIS or to your Joule for Consultants instance. I should be able to log in, hopefully. So you're not any of the dependencies we're going to be talking about aren't going to be relevant for Joule for Consultants. It's the easiest to set up. So you can see over here, I'm now logged into another deployment of Joule for Consultants. So this is an internal demo again that we have that we set up. And it's represented, it's living within this sub account and it's represented by this formation. And the only thing we care about really is the CIS tenant over here. Compare this to a Joule for Business setup. I know we added in a lot of solutions, but at the very minimum, Joule for Business would involve a Joule instance, a CIS tenant, in our case, the LOB with success factors, and the build workzone. So it's going to be a four component thing at minimum, which is why we're going to be talking about workzone and CIS tomorrow, and mainly Joule today. That was a bit of a pretty long deviation from the original topic. Apologies for that. But the key takeaway here is they are different. They're not the same. Joule for consultants, Joule for business, and Joule for developers. They're each good at specific things. I'm just going to get this URL. They're each good at specific things, but for most businesses, Joule for business is what they are interested in, specifically because it integrates with the LOB solutions and users can interact with LOB solutions using Joule. That's another way of, I suppose, positioning Joule internally. If you're looking for that, you know, essentially users can be with one system but still get things done on other systems without logging into them. Okay, that was a lot of information, so I'm happy to take any questions on anything that I've said so far.
So I have a question. So in my
Please go
case,
ahead.
that I'm supporting the users, so they would have the Julie, the business, but I also do configuration. So do I need to have both the business and the consultant?
Um, I would say it's up to you. Joule for business, so the regular Joule, right? It's still going to be able to answer questions from, let's say, help.sap documentation. It just might not have access to all the KPAs and all the SAP nodes. So you could set up Joule for business for the end users in your business, of course, but your organization could also set up Joule for consultants and maybe just give access to Joule for consultants for the implementation experts, such as yourself. So I believe
So I
Joule
would
for
have the two access.
yeah. So you'll so maybe you could have it so that all the business has access to Joule within your LOB solutions, but Joule for consultants access is controlled only for specific implementation experts.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of billing as well, Joule for consultants, I believe, is currently per user per month. So I think it's 35 AI units per user per month. And maybe I can show you this if I have access to this tenant as to what I can maybe pop in an integration guide for Joule for consultants in case you're interested. It's quite easy to set up. I've said this multiple times. Apologies for that. But I cannot emphasize it's probably the easiest thing to set up. And give me one very quick second while I pop in the integration guide for Joule for consultants. So everything you need to set up Joule for consultants is within this one page of documentation. It's 10, I believe it's, yeah, 12 specific steps right now. 11th is optional. Uh, and the only integration you need is, sorry, the only integration you need for Joule for consultants is just having a CIS tenant. That's a good question. With 35 AI units, how many searches we can do with that? So I don't think you're billed on the searches you do with Joule for consultants. I think it's 35 AI units per month per user, regardless of whether that user uses it or not. I don't think you're billed on consumption for Joule for consultants. Although the commercial model does change, so what I say now might not be true or relevant maybe a week or two or maybe a year or two from now. But as of right now, my understanding is it's per user per month. So for Joule for consultants, you're not billed on consumption. So maybe as a summary, if you're interested in knowing when is each Joule flavor important, Joule for business, if you want your end users to be able to use Joule within your LOB solutions, if you want end users to be able to do what Walter was doing, in that have Joule be able to perform actions across your LOB solutions, across your landscape, go for Joule for business. If you're interested in, if you're more of an implementation focused expert, and you're interested, or you're maybe, let's say, you're a Rise architect or you're a project manager and so on, Joule for Consultants is what's going to help you because you don't need information from your systems. You need SAP information. SAP documentation is what you need. SAP best practice, and that's what Joule for Consultants is going to give you. Joule for developers is only relevant if you're working with ABAP code, specifically if you're looking for features like autocomplete and so on. Joule for Consultants is also trained on ABAP programming, but it's not going to be able to autocomplete code for you, of course. You can maybe give it some ABAP snippets and it can explain to you what that ABAP code is doing. It can even generate some simple ABAP code, but Joule for developers is what actually goes and in depth into the ABAP programming language. It's able to autocomplete for you and so on. So each of them have their strengths, and but Joule for business is generally what is deeply integrated within a business. Joule for consultants and Joule for developers are heavily situational. I hope that made sense. Right. Let's dive into how Joule actually works behind the scenes. I believe there was a question, or maybe it was a question that I asked myself, in that how does Joule really know which system to call, what to do, which API to call? And that's where these three components come into play. So from the end user's perspective, the user, opens up the Joule web client and they start talking to Joule. And it might be as simple as what the end user might think is, well, I'm talking to an LLM and it's just giving me answers. But we've seen essentially that it's able to perform actions on different systems. It needs to call OData functions in different systems to get some information and so on. But how does Joule know which system to call, which API to call, what information it can get, and so on? That's again these three components: the scenario catalog, the knowledge catalog, and the context window. And this diagram probably does the best example of explaining this. The idea is that the end user opens up the Joule web client. This could be within SuccessFactors, it could be within Concur, within S4. They open up the Joule web client. And maybe to quickly clarify, because we spoke about Joule for J4C and J4D, we're speaking specifically about Joule for business. If I say Joule, I mean Joule for business. I don't mean J4C and J4D, of course. So this is how Joule for business works behind the scenes. So the end user opens up the web client, they type in a prompt. Apologies, I nearly fell off there. They open up a prompt, or maybe they type in an input. It could be something as simple as show me purchase order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the LLM realizes, well, this isn't something that I know. Or before it even goes to the LLM, the Joule component itself, because the LLM is only a small component of Joule, Joule itself takes in the input from the user and says, okay, show me purchase order. And what's the intent there? It's to display purchase orders. It goes to the scenario catalog first and checks, is this defined in the scenario catalog, this scenario of displaying purchase orders? And what the scenario catalog is, you can think of it as a massive recipe book with multiple pages, each one containing step by step instructions. And each title, so let's say in this case, page one could be what to do when you're asked to display service or purchase orders, right? And the content of that page in the scenario catalog is going to be a step by step list of instructions saying if asked to show purchase orders, you need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to make an API call. This is how you make an API call. This is what you need to do to actually send that API call. This is the information expected of you. So it's step by step instructions. So, and the scenario catalog is essentially pre-programmed. It's information that Joule has access to, and it contains a list of these common scenarios. So when Joule is asked to display purchase orders, display sales orders, and so on, they're very common scenarios. That's what is already baked in as part of the scenario catalog. And in this case, show me a purchase order is quite a common use case that people ask Joule. So I'm certain that it's in the scenario catalog. So that that list of step-by-step instructions is taken and it's appended to the user's prompt, which is show me purchase order 12345. Joule then looks at the knowledge catalog, and this is just the repository of information that Joule has been trained on itself, right? It's different to the scenario catalog because the scenario catalog is just that list of instructions. The knowledge catalog is just information Joule has been trained on. So it looks to see, well, can I get anything extra from the knowledge catalog that the scenario catalog does not have? Maybe it gets the meaning of what a purchase order is and so on. So any relevant information from the knowledge catalog it takes and it also appends to this initial string plus the scenario catalog text. And finally, it looks at the context, saying, okay, what is the end goal? Does the user asking this question as part of something else? Or is the only thing the user is asking for is just being able to view a purchase order or view a sales order? And then it becomes important. Has the user said anything in this conversation, saying maybe something as give me all answers in bullet points instead of paragraphs? So, were there any instructions specified in the conversation earlier that I need to keep track of? That information is retrieved. And finally, role, in which case, can this user actually perform this action? Can they display sales orders on their own on S4? Do they have that permission? That information is also considered. So even before it gets to the LLM, all this information is considered. And what the LLM actually gets is, the initial input from the user combined with information from all three components over here. And now the LLM has a call to make. Do I know this information already, or do I need to call an S4 system? And that decision is usually done based on the scenario catalog information, right? Where if the scenario catalog has an instruction that says you need to call an S4 system, in which case LLM will say, okay, let me get that information from the uh, LOB solution itself, in which case S4. What if the prompt was simpler? What if the prompt was simply when is Sapphire? You wouldn't need the scenario catalog because that isn't going to be answered in the scenario catalog. It's probably in the knowledge catalog, which is information that Joule knows. In which case, it'll just be the knowledge catalog information that's retrieved by Joule, and the information is sent to the LLM. And the LLM says, "Oh, this information is here." And so in that case, all the LLM is doing is just formulating the answer. It's just taking in information from here, and it's just structuring the answer as a paragraph or as a bullet point and sending it back to the web client. So the LLM is really making a decision saying, do I know this information to respond? Or do I need to make an API call, get information, convert that into an answer, and then send it to the web client? So this is how Joule works behind the scenes, is you have these components over here. And what's important over here, you see something called the Joule skill catalog. And I brought this idea of what a Joule skill is early on when I said it's the smallest unit of, or the smallest simple action that Joule can do. And with every release of Joule, when I say Joule is able to do more things, that's essentially the Joule skill catalog being updated. So more functionality. So Joule's being able to do more things basically means that more Joule skills have been added to the Joule skill catalog. An example that I usually use is a couple of months ago, there was an organization that brought up a question saying, uh, we think there's an issue in our Joule configuration because we're not able to modify a specific field on success factors. We're able to view the field, however, using Joule. And initially, all signs pointed to a permissions issue, but all the permissions are provided. So it turned out that with that Joule release at the time, Joule, only Joule skills to view that particular field were available. A Joule skill to update that field wasn't available for Joule. So it was really, the customer had two options then, the organization then, which was they could create a custom Joule skill, and that's something that you can do using Joule Studio 1.0. You can essentially, even if you're not familiar with programming, it's a low code, no code solution where it's drag and drop. You can essentially create flowcharts, like I said. You can have specific steps, and you can deploy that Joule skill for your Joule instance. So, for example, if Joule doesn't support a specific thing, maybe it doesn't support modifying a specific field, you can create a Joule skill, a custom Joule skill, deploy that for your Joule instance. So your Joule can now do what it couldn't do before. That is where the Joule skill catalog really comes in. It's really a list of predefined actions or skills that SAP have provided Joule saying this is what you can do, but you can extend this using Joule Studio 1.0. Joule Studio 2.0 is a whole other conversation, of course. Okay, there were some questions over here that I'd like to take before I move into the high level architecture. So, will J4D provide Node.js or CAP programming code as well? I've mainly seen it used for ABAP. I'd say Joule for Consultants could help with CAP, of course. I'll double check, Raja, if it also supports Node.js and CAP. So essentially JavaScript, right? Uh, Joule for Consultants definitely can, I know. Even I think regular Joule as well should be able to give some initial directions. I'll double check if Joule for Developers specifically supports it. To the best of my knowledge, it's ABAP that it supports. Varun, does Joule for Developers perform agentic actions or just auto-completion? I'm not aware of the agentic capabilities of Joule for developers. It's probably the one thing that I'm not 100% on when it comes to Joule for developers. Auto-completion is supported though. I don't have an answer for the agentic capabilities just yet, partly because that area is ever changing. It's changed a lot since Sapphire. So again, I'll double check. And if you could shoot me an email about that, I'll see if I can get that information out to you. Tripti, which LLM is used for J4C, J4D, and J4B? Essentially, what happens is the generative AI hub on BTP acts as a masking layer. So all PII information and all that is removed, and the data is anonymized. And there's a list of LLMs through our partners that we use. I believe it's one LLM per session, so that's consistent. And I also think it changes based on region. So the exact LLM used would be dependent on the region in which you deploy Joule, I believe. But it would be through a list of pre-approved partners, of course. And finally, Sarah, is scenario catalog updated based on Signavio process mining? I don't have the answer to that. I don't think there is, because I'm not read of any Signavio dependency on that Joule itself has. In fact, I think Signavio is a LOB solution for which you can integrate Joule with. I don't want to say no, because I'm not sure, but um, I wouldn't say, like, I wouldn't be confident essentially that it is updated. I'm not sure if it's going to be based on Signavio process mining. And in case you are interested in which LOB solutions you can integrate Joule for Business with, I've just linked documentation there. So this is currently the list of LOB solutions that are supported by Joule for Business that you can integrate Joule for Business with. So I see Signavio on there. I I don't have visibility into that currently. Apologies. I can find out for you to say how that update happens, but I don't have an answer for that. So I don't want to give you a wrong answer essentially on that. Right. So far we've been speaking about how Joule itself works, how Joule for Business itself works behind the scenes with all these components. Uh, but what we've really been speaking about, taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture, is just this component. So this circular component over here contains all this behind the scenes that is going on. So all these components is all within this single circular component. But like I said, Joule on its own isn't going to be able to do much. If you knock off, let's say hypothetically, let's say you knock off its dependencies, and I'll talk about why they're dependencies, of course. But let's say you knock off build work zone, let's say you knock off CIS, let's say you knock off the LOB solution. So what happens if you have a Joule formation with just Joule, which I don't think is possible, but hypothetically, if it was, let's say the only thing you have is just Joule. You don't have anything else. Going back to Joule's capabilities, and what I'm implying here is imagine if you just had Joule, nothing else over here. What would happen? So we spoke about the four capabilities of Joule: the informational, transactional, navigational, and analytical. Without any of these dependencies, only the informational capability of Joule should work, because that's simply Joule contained within itself, depending on the LLM to provide answers, and these components, of course. But if you're not connecting any LOB solution to Joule itself, then of course transactional capabilities are not going to work because there's no systems for them to be performing actions on or retrieving information from. And let's say you bring in the LOB solution, but you keep build workzone and CIS out. Uh, Transactional and navigational capabilities will still not work. Because we spoke about the idea of permissions, right? That yes, you manage your permissions on the LOB solution itself. So all my success factors permissions are managed on success factors. All my S4 permissions are managed on S4. And if I need more permissions, they're supposed to be assigned to me on S4 and on success factors respectively. But we spoke about this idea of, well, how does Joule know the permissions I have on those systems? And we said that list of permissions needs to be replicated to build workzone. Joule's only going to be checking workzone to see what permissions I have. So without workzone, transactional capabilities and navigational capabilities should still not work because Joule will just think, well, I don't know what permissions this user has, so by default, there's going to be no transactional or navigational capabilities that are going to work. It's just going to be the informational capability that is working. So let's say now we bring in build workzone into the picture. So now we have LOB solutions, Joule, and build workzone. Well, that replication of my permissions on S4 to workzone, how do we do that? I suppose you could use a third party replication tool, uh, something to provision, read my permissions from here, write to workzone. Yes, you could, but single sign-on then becomes a problem because I'll get to this idea of unified Joule over here. Essentially, without CIS sitting in the middle, and this is CIS over here with two components, we use IPS, identity provisioning, to do replications. We use IAS for single sign-on to log into LOB solutions and to Joule itself, because Joule is a web application. So any of all these components are very tightly coupled when it comes to Joule for Business. Each of them has a role to play, and without any one of them, Joule essentially becomes an LLM. It takes away everything that is special about Joule. Of course, on the BTP side, without BTP, because BTP, I call it a dependency because without BTP, there's no actual deployment of Joule. Joule is a BTP application fundamentally, and so is Workzone, so is CIS. So without BTP, you won't have any of these dependencies. You'll just have the LOB solution. You won't have Joule itself as well. So BTP, of course, has to exist as well. So the key takeaway from this slide is all these components come together to make Joule actually work for LOB solutions. Workzone is kind of, I suppose, a special case where it isn't required for all LOB solutions. So that documentation that I linked in the chat, I can link it again. But this is essentially a list of solutions that SAP Joules for business can be integrated with. And over here, you can see there's a column that says whether build workzone is required or not. For the major solutions, success factors and S4, it is required. Ariba as well, it's required. So Ariba solutions. Concur is, I suppose, an IBP as well as a popular solution that we usually activate or help with activation for. It's required for that as well. Concur is probably one of the notable exceptions in that workzone isn't required. Andrew, that is interesting. Let me see. Do you have an S user? It should be public facing documentation. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. Maybe try this link. Right, could you try this link? And this should work. I think this was just the early adopter care because of that being plugged in. The second link should work. I'd be very surprised if it doesn't. Okay. Okay. But key takeaway from here is Waxzone is required for most cases, although there are exceptions like Concur, because Concur, it isn't required because I believe that handles authorizations differently. But Waxzone is quite critical. Without Waxzone, your navigational and transactional capabilities aren't going to work. But let's get into the deployment scenarios. And if you're going to be taking away anything from day one today, it's going to be these deployment scenarios. I will be recapping the deployment scenarios specifically because on day two at the start, I do a very quick recap, but I have an extra slide there in which it would make more sense when I talk about deployment, how that's going to look like on the BTP side of things. But unified Joule is what we at SAP recommend you deploy your Joule in when it comes to deploying Joule in your landscape. The video that we showed with Walter at the start, that was a unified Joule deployment. And how do we know it was a unified Joule deployment? Because a singular Joule instance was used by Walter to communicate with Concur, to communicate with and success factors. So in his case, he had success factors and Concur, and he was talking to Joule within, I believe it was a BuildWorks on business site. So that singular Joule instance could perform actions across those systems. And the reason unified Joule is important, or it's useful and it's what we recommend, is because I believe from a maintenance perspective, like if you're looking at how is our landscape going to scale, uh, this essentially is going to look, and let me bring this formation up to highlight again how this looks in an actual deployment. This is a unified Joule deployment that you're looking at over here. You have a Joule instance, you have a CIS tenant, you have a build workzone instance, and you have an LOB solution. Let's say success factors here. And let's say in the future you want to integrate Joule for S4, you will add S4 as a system over here. Let's say you want to integrate Joule for Concur, you can add Concur as a system over here. And let's say you have a three-tier landscape. Let's say you have dev, quality, and prod. What this is going to look like is you're going to have one formation per landscape tier. So this could be representing your quality landscape. You'll have another formation for your production. You'll have another formation for your test. So realistically, with Unified Joule, you're looking at one of these deployments, one of these formations per landscape tier. So you could end up having three Joule instances, one for prod, one for QA, one for dev. I'll show this to you tomorrow in a different slide where it would be more clear. That's an official architecture from SAP. But that's the simplest way to manage this because in essence, it really comes down to one Joule instance per landscape tier. Your development systems are connected to your development Joule instance. Your quality systems are connected to your quality Joule instance, and your production systems are connected to your production Joule instance. And from the end user's perspective with unified Joule, there is no, for them, they're talking to the same Joule instance and it's able to work across systems. There's no difference to them. If you tell them we've integrated Joule with Concur and S4, they log into S4, they can get information from Concur, they can book flights in Concur, for example. If they log into Concur, they can look at purchase orders in S4 from within Concur. And it makes life a lot easier without having to navigate between two different systems. And again, you can see over here the dependencies still exist, right? But you have build workzone, You have Joule, you have CIS, and you have your LOB solutions. And that's really a formation. LOB solution, CIS, Joule, and work zone. Now, why is this important? And the main important bits are the caveats, of course. And the caveats here really are, as of right now, you can only connect one instance of an LOB solution to a Joule instance. So if you have, let's say, two success factors instances in development, you cannot connect both success factors instances to the same Joule instance. Uh, and the same premise for concur. If you have two concur instances, you cannot connect them to the same Joule instance. So the only exception for this is S4, because as of last month, I believe as of 2 weeks ago, really, there was multi-system support that was announced for S4, meaning that you can connect more than one S4 system to a singular Joule instance. Up until last month, this wasn't supported, but a month ago, this was released in GA, I believe. So now you can support connecting more than one S4 system to a singular Joule instance, but that constraint is only lifted for S4. For everything else, you can only connect one instance to one Joule instance. And the reason for that is data isolation, especially for the cloud solutions. Data isolation is at the tenant level, so you don't want to be combining your SuccessFactors prod and SuccessFactors dev to the same Joule instance, for example. And another constraint is when it comes to S4, as of right now, customer managed Joule that we're talking about is only supported for S4 if it's S4 HANA public cloud and if it's S4 HANA private cloud edition on Rise. If you have an on-prem S4 or if you have ECC or if you have S4 HANA private cloud that it's not on Rise, Joule isn't supported. Customer managed Joule isn't supported for that currently. And of course, for customer managed, even if it's an S4 HANA private cloud on Rise, it needs to be over 2021. That's the minimum version for Joule support. I believe this will be changing because of announcements made at Sapphire. That's a very good question, Baiju. For a customer with test and production SF, or okay, do we need multiple Joule sub accounts as of now? Yes. So the official recommendation, and let's see if I can pull this up very quickly, although I might not have it ready on me, but I'll try. I'm just going to show this tomorrow because I have it usually as a recap slide, but let me pull this up. The general recommendation is one sub account for Joule per landscape tier. So one Joule sub account for production, one Joule sub account for quality, and one Joule sub account for dev. So at the very least, you're going to be having three sub accounts. Let's keep it that way. One for prod, one for dev, one for QA. Um, I'm just going to bring this into view. You will be seeing this tomorrow anyway, but just to address that question, this is the official recommendation when it comes to sub-account structuring. So having a Joule sub-account for development, a Joule sub-account for test, a Joule sub-account for prod. And you can see here your production systems are connected to your production Joule through your production CIS. Your development and tests are connected to your development and test systems, individual Joule instances. They share a CIS. Why? I'll talk about this tomorrow when we talk specifically about CIS. But this is generally the setup that we recommend. So to answer your question, Baiju, yes. As of right now, if we have a production SF, a test SF, and a quality SF, that's going to be three different Joule instances that you'd be connecting them to. Case of S4, one landscape has more than one client. Yeah. So as of last month, if you asked me this question 2 months ago, I would have said each client needs to be connected to their own Joule instance. But as of last month, you can connect more than one client or more than one S4 system to the same Joule instance. So in this case, you would have S4 HANA Private Cloud System 1, S4 HANA Private Cloud System 2. So, your QS4 or DS4, quality and dev, for example, they can be connected to the same Joule instance. And the multi-system support link that I linked in the chat is how that's going to be supported. So in that case, um, I'd still be leaning towards, keep your quality systems connected to a quality Joule instance I'd still lean towards that recommendation of one Joule instance per landscape tier. But if you have multiple systems in quality, for example, multiple systems in dev for S4, you can connect multiple dev S4s to a dev Joule as of last month. Any documentation for how Joule can be used for BDC? The link that I gave you, Jeevan, is what I have available right now. I believe with the analytical capability in SAC, there are some caveats to that that should be documented over here. For in SAC and Joule, I'm not sure if BDC is supported as a LOB solution that you can integrate Joule with just yet. I don't see it on that list over there. Yeah, but thank you very much for those questions. I'm keeping an eye on chat still. Okay. Of course, we recommend unified Joule, but this not might always not be what is feasible for you as the business requirements could be different. Another way is, you could go this approach where this was one of the organizations we worked with where they said, we want to keep success factors completely separate. We don't want it to be part of a unified Joule deployment. However, we still want Joule for success factors. And this is what that would look like. And the main negative or the main con for this approach is for your end user, when they open up success factors, they're going to see the Joule web client. They're going to open it up. They're going to talk to it. They can ask for leave requests to be made and so on, and Joule will do it. But if they're talking to Joule on success factors and they say, "Can you get me this sales order from S4?" Joule will not be able to do that because this Joule web client belongs to this Joule, and this Joule isn't connected to these systems. As you can see, it's only connected to success factors. If the end user is talking to Joule within these systems, Joule can work across these systems, but it can't fetch information from success factors. And it can get confusing for end users because from their perspective, they're seeing just the web client, but they don't realize it's connected to two different Joule instances. And of course, how would this look like in an actual BTP setup? This would be two different formations, of course. There'll be formation one with success factors CISA, Joule, and this work zone. And there'll be another formation with all these LOB solutions, CISB, Joule, and this work zone. So it really is dependent on the business. We just feel that unified Joule is the easiest way to get value across systems and also just to make sure that end users get a consistent experience across these systems. Okay, we have 17 minutes, so I'd like to go through this topic and then show you the demo on BTP. So the readiness check service is something that we offer at SAP for customers, especially if you're a max attention, max success, or premium engagement customer. We offer this free of charge. And the idea is that there is a Joule activation. So activating Joule for any LOB, so integrating Joule for business with S4 or success factors. It isn't complicated, but there's usually a lot of steps, and missing some of these steps can, when you activate Joule, you might realize, well, my navigational and transactional capability isn't working, and you might have missed one of the many little steps that are required. So on success factors, this is the document that we wrote up initially for the individual steps that you'd have to do to integrate success factors for Joule. Sorry, integrate Joule for success factors. And don't be scared. It's still straightforward, but there's just lots of little steps that are required. And you might end up missing some of these. So the readiness check service is something that we at SAP offer. And it's essentially us. We'll engage with you on an individual basis. You'll get a consultant assigned to you. There will be a kickoff call where everything I'm saying is part of day one and day two will be covered in that kickoff call, but it'll be in a much more concise, shorter format. It'll be tailored towards your landscape. Specifically, it wouldn't be a one to many discussion where I have to cover all caveats. It would be tailored towards what you have. And then the consultant will request access to your systems, your BTP, your build work zone, your CIS, and maybe your S4 if you're looking to integrate it for S4. And we'll essentially perform prerequisite checks to see if there's something that you've missed or if there's any prerequisites that you haven't fulfilled. So prior to you activating Joule, you can request this from SAP. And this is if you're a premium engagement or max attention or max success customer, this is complimentary. So you get us doing the heavy lifting of looking at, okay, what prerequisites have you not met? And this prerequisite check service is usually it itself, I call it a doorway into other services, because if you do enlist SAP's help for activation, most likely you'd be asked if you had performed this readiness check. And in which case, if you have, you can just give them the report so they know what they have to do to help you with the activation and things get smoother. So it is something that is available. So in case you are a max attention, a max success, or a premium engagement customer, I'll have my email in the chat. Shoot me an email about it, and I'm happy to put you in touch with the people who can actually get you started if this is something you're interested in. If even if you're not a PE customer or a max attention or max success customer, do shoot me an email, and I'll connect you to the right people who can help you get an equivalent of this if such a thing exists. It's just a quick call out to this existing because there is resources for you to support you to activate Joule. This EGI is one of them. It's just a one-to-many setup, and my goal is to give you a crash course on what to expect when you go and activate Joule, and to also give you a crash course on the individual dependencies, the different LOBs that Joule depends on, so you know at a high level what needs to be done on each one and where things can trip you up. That's what I aim to do in this EGI. We're getting to the BTP component, and I found it useful. Shirley, I'm not sure what a CRE environment is. We quite like our three-letter acronyms at SAP, so I'm not sure what
So this
exactly. Sorry, go on.
this is a controlled regulatory environment. Sorry, it's not controlled. It's commercial regulated environment. This is for the A&D industries, like the um, it is hosted by NS2.
Okay, so with NS2, the problem is, and I can show you this because I do show this in the demo. We've seen this recently in that the fundamental result of integrating Joule with LOB solutions is this formation, right? And this formation consists of systems that you integrate Joule with. In CRE environments or in NS2 hosted environments, those systems that exist in those environments usually don't show up here under system landscape. So they wouldn't be able to be added to a formation. So that's my experience with working with those systems. Maybe NS2 have an update on that. But as of at least a month and a half ago, those systems were not showing up here. So it wasn't available for those systems. You couldn't integrate Joule with them.
Okay, thank you.
But this is a month and a half old. Maybe
Mhm.
NS2 have changed their stance on that since.
Yeah, I can check with the NS2 resources. Yeah,
Brilliant. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. And that was a good segue into this whole topic of, okay, what do we really need to do on BTP to activate Joule? So at the global account level, you're going to be looking to see if you have Joule entitlements. So you go to your global account, you go to service assignments, and you really look to see, do you have the entitlements to actually use Joule in any of your systems? So when I type in Joule, you're going to be seeing a couple of things: Joule Deep Research, Joule, and Joule Preview. Also Joule for consultants and Joule for developers. So like I said, there's different entitlements. To use Joule for consultants, you need the SAP consulting capability. For Joule for developers, you need J4D ABAP and so on. But for regular Joule, Joule for business, it's sufficient if you have DAS application. If you have this instance, you're good to go. Another thing that I'll usually check is I check to see if there's build works on entitlements, and I'll just show you that very quickly. So it doesn't matter if you have standard edition or advanced edition. Generally, the foundation plan of either is sufficient. And the reason the foundation plan is sufficient is I'll talk about build works on tomorrow, but as a quick, I suppose, very quick summary, we don't really care about build work zone's front end capabilities. So if you're familiar with business sites and so on build work zone, for the purposes of integrating Joule, we don't care about the front end. We treat build work zone exclusively as a backend system, and it's really used as a information store to store what authorizations a user has on different systems. So the foundation plan is sufficient for that. It doesn't matter if it's standard or advanced. If you have either, it's fine, but just the foundation plan is sufficient. Another question that I usually get is, can we use an existing build workzone? Of course you can, but again, in the interest of simple management, we found it a lot simpler to create a sub account exclusively for Joule and subscribe to a foundation plan instance of workzone within that sub account. So that build workzone only contains Joule specific config. It's not messing with any existing configs or existing projects you might have on build workzone instances elsewhere. So once you check your entitlements, we'll go into system landscape, specifically into systems, and you're going to be checking, let's say you're integrating Joule for S4. We'll just do a very quick check here to see. So all these systems show up over here. And we'll do a very quick check for success factors. There should be some that show up, yes, over here. So the systems that show up here should show up by default automatically. There shouldn't be any intervention that you need. And the systems that show up here automatically show up because this global account is linked to a customer ID. And these systems are also linked to a customer ID. So the systems that show up here automatically because these systems have the same customer ID association as this global account. I have seen cases, and this is quite common, where you're even the CIS, for example, so Cloud Identity Services, uh, over here, this also is usually linked to a CRM ID or customer ID. I've seen cases where the CIS tenant is linked to a different customer number because the organization has multiple entities and so on. But the end goal for activating Joule for an LOB solution is getting all the components to show up here. So any system that is to be a part of this formation, which is the end result, really, needs to be available under systems. So Joule itself is created for you. So that's not something you're looking out for. You're really looking out to see if you see the build workzone you need, if you see the CIS tenant you need, and you see your S4 or success factors or Concur or Ariba or any LOB of your choice. If you see those systems under system landscape, you're kind of good to go. And again, you might ask, well, what do we need? So how do we actually create this formation over here? That's done by running the Joule booster. And the idea is that that prerequisite check that I suggested, that is something that you get done for your organization. After that is when we recommend you run the Joule booster. And you're going to see two boosters here, Joule Preview and Joule. Fundamentally, they are the same. Joule Preview is the same as Joule with one difference. And I know that kind of contradicts my statement of fundamentally they are the same, but they are the same in terms of technical capability. The only difference is Joule Preview gets access to Joule updates 2 weeks before the regular Joule instance gets access. So one of the use cases we've seen for Joule Preview is organizations setting up Joule Preview in their lower level environments. So maybe in development, they have their Joule formation and development. They connect their development systems to a Joule Preview instance, and they test out things that are coming out. And then, it's still going to be rolled out to Joule production because it's a cloud service. It's just in case you're interested in getting things 2 weeks earlier, you can use Joule Preview. But fundamentally, they're the same. This is going to fail for me because I don't have the authorizations to run it. But what the booster really is, you choose the sub account. So you create your BTP Joule sub account, of course, but you just select that sub account, and that's you saying, I want the booster to create a Joule instance for me in that sub account. You choose the CIS tenant, saying, I want this tenant to be part of this Joule formation. You choose your LOB solution, saying I want this success factors or I want this S4 to be part of this formation. And you go through the wizard and you click finish, and there's an automation that runs in the background. And the result of this booster running is the creation of a formation of type integration with Joule. And you might ask, well, I've integrated Joule with S4 initially. Now I want to integrate Joule with success factors. Do I need to run the booster again? The answer is no. You only run the booster when you want another Joule formation. So realistically, if you're going for unified Joule in a three-tier landscape, you run the booster three times, right? Because the sub account is going to keep changing, at least, at the very least, as is your LOB solutions. So you'll have your production Joule formation, your development Joule formation, and your quality Joule formation. But let's say you want to add success factors to your development Joule formation. There will be a button. I have global account viewer, so I don't have the option, but there will be a button to add system, and you can just add in your success factors instance, or in this case, because success factors is here, you can add in your S4 instance to this formation. There will be a resynchronization that happens, and it'll get back into ready state, meaning that Joule is now integrated with your new LOB solution. Of course, there's still some prerequisites, like for example, going into S4, you need to fulfill these prerequisites prior to you actually adding the system into the formation. But once you fulfill these prerequisites, you can add the system into the formation. After resynchronization, your users will be able to access Joule from within that LOB solution. This is really it at the global account level, Joule boosters, system landscapes, so systems and formations. Yes, Arab, you're correct. CIS is fundamentally a BTP service, but you still get a tenant for it. You get a dedicated tenant for it. And the reason it's showing up as a system is because it's going to be part of a formation. That's why. The same thing with Wexon. Wexon is still a BTP application, but because you get a tenant for it and it needs to be part of this formation, it still shows up as a specific system. So you're correct. It's not a system as per the definition of a system, but because you still get tenants for it, it shows up over there. And only systems that are showing up over here can be part of a Joule formation. And I suppose initially questions were why is Joule not supported for on-prem systems? It's because on-prem systems will not be visible to BTP under systems, so they can't be part of the system landscape. And as a result, they can't be part of a formation, so Joule will not be in, you can't integrate Joule with it. Of course, after Sapphire, I believe there are some changes on that note that were announced. I'd like to go through the sub-account config, but I'd like to do that tomorrow just in the interest of time. What I'd like to do in the 2 minutes that we have is I'm going to pop in the documents, the presentations that I essentially showed today as files into this chat. Don't be alarmed if you're not able to download it. It's very common. It's more common than it isn't for users to not be able to download. It's organizational restrictions. There's not much we can do on our side, which is why I make my email available. So you can always shoot me an email and I can send it over to you again. So there should be two documents that you're going to be seeing. I will let you know when they have been uploaded. Both documents have been uploaded. In case you cannot see it, this is my email. And please use the subject line so I can quickly catch your email coming through. And I can email the content over to you in case you weren't able to see it in the chat. Give me a very quick second while I type this out. And the second PDF that I've uploaded is essentially hands-on exercises. Essentially is intended, it's to get you up to speed with some of the activities you'd be doing when you activate Joule yourself. I'd like to quickly go through it because I know we have a minute, so I'll try to be as concise as I can, but I might run over. Apologies for that. So essentially, what we made is this is so all the I hope you can still see my screen. So all this is hands-on exercises, and these exercises are split into two topics, type 1 and type 2. Type 1, so all the type 1 tasks are some of the prerequisites that you'd have to meet to actually integrate Joule in your landscape. And I intend for you to perform these as a read-only exercise. I don't advise you to change it until you're comfortable and you have approval from your cab change approval boards and so on internally. Type 2 exercises are more hands-on, and I essentially linked ways to get a sample or trial BTP global account, a trial BTP sub account, and a trial CIS. But type 1 tasks, these are things you will be performing when you, as prerequisites, when you go and activate Joule. The only correction here is It's foundation or standard is sufficient. You don't need foundation and standard. That's just one correction I'd like to note out. But for example, this is like things I showed you today, checking if entitlements are available at the global account level, why this is a prerequisite, how to do this check along with screenshots, and then what the expected result is. So if you meet the expected result, you're good to go. You've fulfilled this prerequisite. If you haven't met the expected result, what you can do. Same thing over here, checking if your system is available under system landscape, why it's relevant, how to do it. If it is available, the next step is adding it and registering it in the system landscape. So even if it is visible, there is one additional step you have to do. That's what you have to do next. If the system isn't available, these are things that you can do to make it available. So that these are all the type 1 tasks. These are all prerequisites that you'd have to fulfill. And essentially, the reason for why you have to fulfill it, what qualifies as you having fulfilled it, and what to do if you haven't fulfilled it successfully. These are all type 1 tasks. The type 2 tasks are, just hands-on exercises if you're willing to get your hands dirty. Very simple. It's just establishing trust between your sub account and your CIS tenant. I'll demonstrate this to you tomorrow anyway, in case there are issues with doing that. Um, just confirming if you're able to see the the debt material. If you're not able to see it, please shoot me an email. My email is in chat. I'm just going to copy and paste this again, and I can send the decks over to you. If in case you can't see it, it's most likely due to your Zoom client. The organization sometimes configure it to not download anything from chat. So shoot me an email and I can send it over to you.
Hi, I'm using my personal laptop, but still I don't see your PDF. Did you upload just now or is it uploaded earlier?
I uploaded it at 5:15, about 3 minutes ago, not any. So if I'm in GMT, so 3 minutes ago, but I can upload it again just to see maybe if you can see it this time.
I just see your content like day one content and then by mail ID and then the subject.
Okay,
That's
you're
it.
not actually seeing attachments. That's odd. Right, let me upload it again, just in case you can't see it. Otherwise, I can send it over to via email. That's no problem either. I've uploaded it again. Uh, documents for day one, and hopefully you should be able to see it this now. Okay, thank you for that, Kanda. That is good information to know.
Okay.
So
Yeah, then
in
I
case,
mail to you,
yeah,
Australian.
shoot me an email. Try for that subject if you can, so I can easily catch your email. But in case you can't, that's fine as well. Thank you very much for joining me today, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I know that was a lot of information. I look forward to seeing you at day two tomorrow, and it will be a lot more technical. It's CIS, it's build work zone. So if you thought today was more abstract, tomorrow is going to be a lot more technical. Yeah, and it's going to be a crash course in CIS and work zone. So I look forward to delivering that as well. That being said, have a great day today. I'll stay on the call for another 2 minutes just in case there's some questions that people have. But feel free to leave the session if you don't have any questions. Sorry about that. Right now, Joule isn't available in a BTP trial account. It is something we're requesting to make available. But the hands-on exercises for day one and day two, if it's in the hands-on exercises, if it's a type 2 task, you can do that in a trial account. Um, but Joule itself, activating it right now, you can't do it in a trial account. I hope that will change in the future, but as of right now, end to end, it can't be done. Right, I'm going to end the call there. Thank you very much for joining in. I will see you tomorrow.